Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Lenny and Maria Deep Dive.
I'm Maria.
I'm Lenny, and today we're diving into a book that's really thought-provoking.
Oh, definitely thought-provoking.
It's Racism on Trial, The Chicano Fight for Justice by Ian F. Haney Lopez.
Buckle up, because we're going deep into courtroom drama, how racial identities can actually change and evolve, and a whole lot of history.
Yeah, this book really blew me away, Maria. Like, right from the beginning, it throws out this wild idea that whiteness isn't this, fixed category. It expands.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, imagine groups who just a few decades ago weren't seen as white, but now they are closer to it. The book even mentions Cubans and Japanese Americans.
I'm not kidding.
I mean, what do you think, listener? Does that mess with how you see race?
Totally makes you question everything.
Yeah.
But for me, the core of this book is the Chicano fight for justice. It focuses on these two big legal cases, the East LA 13 and the Biltmore 6.
And that's where it gets super interesting. This all happened when a lot of Mexicans actually thought of themselves as white. So why this whole push to become Chicano? That's the puzzle we're going to solve together.
Yeah, to get that, we got to rewind a bit. The book takes us to East LA and shows how they went from a conquered generation to creating a new identity.
It's powerful stuff and rooted in some seriously shocking history. Like in the 1850s, this respected California leader was blocked from testifying just because of his mixed ancestry. Can you believe that?
It's like saying you can't even speak up for yourself just based on who you are. And this prejudice against Mexicans, it went on way into the 1960s. The book quotes this judge who called Mexicans animals and said they didn't get the Ten Commandments. I mean, right in court.
And what's crucial to understand, Lenny, is that this wasn't just one bad judge. It's deeper than that. It's what the book calls common sense racism.
So it's like those biases we all pick up sometimes without even realizing it. They become common sense and people just act on them without thinking.
Exactly. The book has this example about how the police went after liquor violations in Mexican communities way more aggressively. Not because Mexicans were drinking more, but because of these existing ideas about how they behave.
It's like they decided an entire community was criminal just based on prejudice. And that leads us to legal violence, this idea that the legal system itself can be a weapon.
Right. Think about it denying basic services, discriminatory practices by the police and courts, basically using the law to keep people down.
The book has this chilling story from a former deputy sheriff. He said the LAPD treated East LA like a war zone. They wouldn't even respond to emergencies there the same way they would in white neighborhoods. Like those lives didn't matter.
And here's the twist. This constant oppression, this legal violence, it actually sparked the Chicano movement. The more they were pushed down, the harder they fought back.
It's like the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we see that strength in the protests, the student walkouts, and groups like the Brown Berets. The book really captures that energy, like something had to change.
The Brown Berets are a fascinating story. They didn't start out as this militant group. They were all about community service, voter registration, helping their neighbors.
So what turned them into this symbol of resistance?
The police, it was the constant harassment and brutality that radicalized them. They realized they couldn't just stand by and watch their community get hurt. They had to fight back. And there are other people like that, too. The book introduces us to this lawyer, Oscar Acosta, a major figure in the movement.
Yeah, Acosta. He was something else. The book describes him as super charismatic, almost larger than life, not afraid to stir things up in court, and then poof, he vanishes. It's a total mystery.
His story really shows how intense things were and the risks people took. But like the Brown Berets Acosta started out pretty traditional. He was a successful lawyer. But seeing the Chicano movement, the discrimination, it radicalized him.
So we've talked about prejudice and legal violence. But what about this Chicano identity? What did it even mean? How is it different from being Mexican-American?
That's a great question. The book explains how Chicanos rejected the whole idea of assimilation. They saw that trying to blend in to be seen as white, it didn't protect them from anything. They wanted to take back their heritage and create a new identity based on pride.
And there was that concept of Aztlan, this mythical Aztec homeland. What did that symbol mean for the movement?
It was about connecting to their indigenous roots, going way beyond the Mexican-American experience. It was about belonging, but not on the dominant culture's terms, creating their own space, their own story.
Taking back your own story, it's powerful. But the book also talks about some of the complicated stuff within the movement, especially around gender.
Right. The book asks some tough questions about how ideas about men and women shaped the Chicano movement. Like, how did activists use race to justify traditional gender roles? And how did those roles affect the movement?
Yeah, those are important questions. But before we go there, what happened to the Chicano movement overall? Where did all that passion go?
It's complicated. The book talks about how it declined, partly from disagreements within the movement and partly from all the pressure and violence they faced. Fighting on multiple fronts, constantly facing opposition. It takes its toll.
So they were fighting the system but also struggling to figure out their own vision.
Exactly. And what's really concerning is that the book says in the decades since the Chicano movement, legal violence against minorities hasn't gone away. It's actually gotten worse.
Wait, what? I thought things were supposed to be getting better. What happened?
The book blames the war on crime. This tough-on-crime approach led to policies that really targeted minority communities.
So even though the Chicano movement was fading, the system was finding new ways to control and criminalize them.
That's the argument. Think about it. Mass incarceration, mandatory minimum sentences, the militarization of police. It wasn't random. It was driven by fear and anxiety about race, by a desire to stay in control.
It's like an endless cycle. And the book connects this to rap and hip-hop music today, right?
Totally. Those genres often reflect that struggle with criminalization and identity. It's like the Chicano movement's legacy is alive in the music and the lives of young people today.
This book was written a while back, but it's clear these issues are still happening. The murder of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter police reform, it's like we're still fighting the same battles over race and justice that the Chicano movement fought.
Exactly. What's so valuable about this book is that it helps us understand how oppression continues even when prejudice seems to be fading.
Okay, so if racism is so deeply embedded in everything, how do we even begin to fix it? It feels impossible.
The book doesn't have easy answers, but it says we need to start by challenging those common sense assumptions about race, those unconscious biases we have that shape our thinking even when we think we're being fair.
So we need to pay more attention to the stories we tell ourselves about race.
Yeah.
The things we believe even when we don't realize it.
Yes, it's about being more aware, more critical of the information we get and the assumptions we make.
Wow, that's a lot to process. It feels like this book has given us more questions than answers.
And that's not always bad. Sometimes the best deep dives are the ones that leave us thinking. The goal isn't always to find every answer, but to think critically and understand complex issues.
I'm still thinking about everything we've talked about, but one thing that really struck me was how the Chicano movement redefined their identity. They refused to be called white and created something new and powerful.
Absolutely. It shows that identity isn't fixed. It's something we choose and shape. And the book reminds us those choices can change the world.
We've really gone deep, haven't we?
We have. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive into racism on trial, what does it all mean for us today, for the listener?
That's the big question, right? This isn't just history. It's like a wake-up call about how race, power, and violence are still woven into everything.
I think one of the things that really got me was how this book challenged those common sense assumptions about race, like those subtle biases we might not even realize we have.
Yeah, and the book argues that those biases, they're not just in our heads. They're built into our systems, our laws, our everyday interactions.
So it's not just about individual prejudice. It's about how these bigger systems keep inequality going, often without us even knowing.
Exactly. The book doesn't sugarcoat it either. It says that fixing these systems, it's going to be tough. It's a long road.
But it doesn't leave us completely hopeless, right? What can we do to start challenging these patterns of racism?
Well, the book talks about a few things. One is education, learning about the history of racial injustice, how bias works, and how it still affects us today.
So becoming more aware, more critical of the information we get and the assumptions we make.
Right. Another thing is challenging those common sense narratives about race that we hear all the time, whether it's in the news and conversations or even in our own thoughts.
Like questioning the stories we've always been told and the ways we've been taught to think about race.
And the book also stresses the importance of taking action, joining movements for social justice, speaking out against racism, holding our institutions accountable for making things more equitable.
So realizing that we're all part of this system and we all have a part to play in changing it.
Exactly. This deep dive into racism on trial has been a journey, for sure. Challenging at times, but really important. It's made us face some hard truths and grapple with tough questions.
Yeah, and even though it hasn't given us all the answers, it has given us a way to understand how racial injustice keeps happening and what we can do about it.
So listener, we leave you with this. How can you challenge those assumptions about race in your own life? What can you do to help build a more just and fair world? These are questions we all need to keep thinking about and working on together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.